The biggest video on my channel to this date is my Fall Guys video that topped 3 million views, which is absolutely crazy. But what's funny about this video is that every video before it was a bunch of Hello Neighbor videos. Well, clearly I like the game, and as hard as it is to admit, the game has almost completely vanished from mainstream YouTube coverage. But why did this happen? Why was the game so successful in the first place, and why did people just as quickly as they did pick it up, put it back down? Well, let's take a trip back to 2016, when Hello Neighbor's pre-alpha was first released. The brand new Hello Neighbor had its very first trailer, and along with this trailer came the actual pre-alpha, starting its very first physical mark as a video game. TinyBuild was a very small company, and besides the minimal trailer, they had no way to actually get this game out to eyes. But this is when we see one of TinyBuild's greatest ideas. Advertisements are how we see many games gain publicity, and I'm sure we've all seen the big dogs like Fortnite and Valorant advertise themselves all around the internet, more specifically YouTube, because they're aware of the massive audience of gamers that watch gaming videos. But what if there was an even cheaper and quite frankly way stronger way to gain advertising? Well, the answer is simple. There is. Because sure, anyone can hop onto Google Ads, purchase some ads, and get a few thousand interactions through that. But oftentimes, these ads aren't actually very effective, because a basic banner or even a 15-second video can't necessarily convince people to download a brand new game. But what would work is if, say, the advertisers reached out to the actual content creators for some exposure, more specifically the ones that can manage to pull millions of eyes towards a new game. And no, I'm not talking about something like Raid Shadow Legends where they pay for an integration, because even then, most people are aware that the creator is being told what to say, and that the whole pitch is coming from somebody who doesn't even actually play the game they're advertising. But I'm talking about, instead of advertising it within a video, having these content creators actually play the game and make a video on it. I mean, it would allow the game to be seen by tens of millions, it would be a whole 10-minute video of exposure, get people to start discussing the game, even allow for people to be entertained while being advertised to, and hell, sometimes these video integrations are actually free. TinyBuild, the creators of Hello Neighbor, instead of traditional marketing, decided to email tons of YouTubers and encourage them to try this brand new game that everyone was playing to get the word around about it, and it worked. Hello Neighbor became increasingly popular among the YouTube gaming community to the point where everyone was talking about it. However, sure, the game primarily marketed super well, but that one factor can't alone carry a game to gaining some serious traction. But let's think about the actual game and the absolute genius concept of it. Hello Neighbor was labeled as a horror game, and similar to most horror games, it involves a cat and mouse style of gameplay, however with a major twist, which is the actual map and, well, most importantly, the cat. The neighbor, now labeled as Theodore Peterson, was seeming suspicious at his house, and it then becomes you, the player's job, to break into the house to enter his locked up basement, to find the secrets inside, while of course, the neighbor chases you down. Simple enough. However, the neighbor AI was way different than the average AI you'd see in normal horror games, and the AI actually has a brain. It actually learns over time. For example, say you enter through a window. The next time you try to enter, he might actually board it up, forcing you to try different routes. And if I'm being honest, just hearing this makes me want to hop on the game right now, and many people agreed, because this pre-alpha, while very buggy and minimal with features, was a whole lot of fun no matter how simple it was. What made this even better too was the mystery behind it. Like I said, this game wasn't very finished, like at all. Getting into the basement literally wasn't even possible, but this actually brought up some new mysteries and a build-up in community trying to answer the question, what was in the basement? This mystery was very interesting because, I mean, it was the whole point of the game, but the ending didn't quite exist yet. But this was actually a good thing for TinyBuild, because one of their clear goals when trying to get YouTubers to play this game was to not only get people to watch, but to get people invested in the community and submerge them in the content. TinyBuild saw this hype around their game, more specifically the lore, and they decided it was time to reinvent the game. Because as we would learn to find out, all these mysteries and clues people were discovering didn't actually have anything to do with the game, and every theory created was actually just a bunch of linked coincidences. But by the release of the real alpha, TinyBuild actually began to play into the community by having a real lore into the game that people could discover. And throughout the first couple of alphas, TinyBuild would this time put tiny teases as to what the next parts of the game would include, or even what could be in the basement. Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 in particular were considered the prime of the game. And as mentioned before, the smart neighbor and the cliffhanging yet engaging storyline of the game kept everybody interested. Well, Hello Neighbor quickly ran into a super large problem, starting with a super large house, or as we we know it, Hello Neighbor Alpha 3. It seemed like no matter where you went, Hello Neighbor would just be everywhere on every channel, going around faster than anything. TinyBuild released their third main alpha update to this game, but try something very different. Because before, we've seen like, you know, just regular houses. Maybe some questionable things in those houses, but regular houses nonetheless. Anyway, instead of the normal house we originally saw commonly in the game, TinyBuild wanted to add a vertical plane and created an absolutely massive house with all sorts of features and ways to travel around the map. And this is where we run into major issues. Hello Neighbor Alpha 3, or more generally the rest of the production of the final game, revolved around this massive house up until release. And to be honest, the idea of playing on this massive house on paper sounds actually pretty fun, but that would be assuming it was done correctly, and spoiler alert, it was not. At the peak of Hello Neighbor's popularity, and with the hype of the game building up by the second, TinyBuild absolutely ruined everything they built up previously. Going back to when I was praising the game, it might have seemed like a fun game, and it was, but this alpha took every positive I just mentioned and threw them away. Hello Neighbor throughout its first alpha strived in its puzzles, not only for how intricate they were, but also for how unbelievably difficult yet rewarding they were as well. Not to mention there were multiple routes to do things in the game. However, something everybody agreeably hated about Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 was having to build and platform. However, if that wasn't your cup of tea, the homes were very small and the game could be completed usually through a different path. Well, when you have a map as massive as Alpha 3, guess what you're gonna have to do? Yep, tons of building and tons of platforming. Yeah, nobody had a good time.
Again this way. Whoop. No! Fucking what the fuck?
And by solving obnoxious, often platform-based puzzles, there were mini game modes within the game called nightmares. And after completing these nightmares, you can unlock special abilities, including a hiding ability, a double jump ability, and a push ability, all required to beat the game. But guess what you have to do to collect one of these abilities? Yep, hardcore, and tons of it. Another killing issue about this game was the bugs. The big selling point of Hello Neighbor at the end of the day, despite not delivering well in the final game, was it being a horror puzzle game. But both of these things, horror and puzzles, are completely ruined by the bugs that even carried over into the final game. For the vast majority of the game, you can find yourself in spots the neighbor is unable to reach himself, and there's a good 25% chance that while you're playing, the neighbor's gonna accidentally get himself stuck in some sort of wall. Not to mention, his AI was basically ruined, and we used to see the neighbor strategically prepare for you over time by boarding up new entrances or maybe putting up a new camera, but by Alpha 3, the neighbor's AI had become washed up, and the idea of having any sort of real human brain was thrown out of the window. Since in these new updates, all the neighbor actually would do is place cameras. Nothing else. Just hundreds of cameras. As for the puzzles, well, you may have played the game before and out of anger actually turned it off when you could not for the life of you figure out a puzzle, and it almost felt like there were pieces missing. Well, guess what? That's because chances are they were. Every time the game gets reloaded, there's actually a pretty good chance that all the items that have spawned will just fall through the map, sometimes being items that you literally need to beat the game. And if they do that, they are not coming back without restarting from the last save they existed at. So if you spend the 3 hours it takes to reach some of the final puzzles and something fell through the floor, it's just gone. And I have no clue why this wasn't ever solved, or should I say why it still hasn't, because Hello Neighbor 2 recently went into alpha and has the exact same problem. The confusing part about all of this, well, especially considering there was a game delay, was what in the world were the devs doing? Well, the gameplay may have sucked, but as mentioned before, the game became almost more known for its extensive lore anyway, so there's still that, right? No, not at all. Hello Neighbor after its pre-alpha started building their very own lore, and to be fair, the lore for the longest time was actually built super well, leaving small but exciting bits of the story. But eventually it seemed like the lore was all they worried about and what they put all their time towards, and by Alpha 3 they had completely disregarded everything else. I think most people who played Alpha 3 can agree the majority of the audience wasn't motivated by the gameplay itself, but just to find out the actual secrets of the game. And not many people could find themselves casually playing the title for the enjoyment of the gameplay. And good lore always is a great thing, that's not the issue, but the issue comes into play when there's no gameplay to back it up. And lore is supposed to motivate the player to finish the game, but it's supposed to be an actual playable and fun experience rather than just a miserable 10-hour trial and error game to the end. And after all that work to reach the end and unlock the final basement, defeat the final boss, just for it all to end up being a dream. Yeah, that's the biggest fuck you I've ever seen from a game developer ever. But I think it's time we summarize and answer the question in the title. What happened to Hello Neighbor? Well, I think it's pretty simple. Nobody cares about it anymore. I wouldn't say it was a fad, because for quite a long time every channel adored this game, but the final release disappointed everyone gameplay-wise and lore-wise so much that most people don't even recommend playing it at all. And when would suggest trying the older versions of the game that are playable on Steam for free now. I could bet most of you guys were surprised earlier when I mentioned a Hello Neighbor sequel being in the works, and most likely it was the first time you've ever heard about it. Well, this downfall not only made people not like the game, but they refused to give it a chance altogether. Markiplier, one of the main pioneers for Hello Neighbor in the alpha, didn't even give it a try, and nor did most YouTubers, because overall the sequel seems like a recipe for disaster and disappointment similar to what we saw in the original Hello Neighbor, despite the initial reactions to the sequel actually being pretty well. When it comes to the future of the game, I think we could be reaching the end. I do think Hello Neighbor 2 will be released, and I do genuinely suggest you try the game out if you haven't already, because it's just in its first alpha, and as of right now definitely has potential, but it seems like that won't even matter anymore, because we all saw what happened with the original game, where the alphas greatly outdid the final version, and there's no reason to believe this title will be any different. But it's going to be open world, and it seems like it'll at least be interesting. But anyway, that's pretty much going to be all for this video, but I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.